If you watch the modern news cycle, you likely feel a chronic, baseline anxiety. There is a universal sensation that society is constantly teetering on the edge of a cliff, about to shatter, but somehow never quite tipping over. We are heavily conditioned to view this constant upheaval as a defect. When institutions break down and crises overlap, we usually blame incompetent leadership or accidental systemic failure. We treat the chaos like a bug in the software. But systems engineering offers a very different rule. When a highly complex machine consistently produces the exact same chaotic output year after year, the analyst has to assume the machine is working exactly as designed. This suggests we are looking at a deliberate architecture of governance, a mechanism where institutional control is maintained by intentionally suspending society in a state of perpetual transition. To survive this era, we must move past reacting to the headlines and instead begin reverse engineering the machine that produces them. Looking at this diagram, leverage isn't in the solid blocks of the old or new order. It exists in the dark void between them, weaponized liminality. Power structures operate here by suspending old laws, then intentionally delaying the ratification of new systems. Living in this legal gray area creates a psychological condition known as systemic vertigo. Because the rules are constantly in flux, populations become deeply disoriented, making them highly susceptible to manipulation. But keeping people in a void isn't enough to drive policy. You also have to force them to move fast. That brings us to the second component of the machine, the accelerator. By framing policy shifts as a ticking countdown, the machine rapidly compresses the legislative schedule, crushing the zone for public oversight. This compressed timeframe bypasses democratic debate, forcing the public to accept radical executive mandates they would otherwise reject. Urgency is weaponized to frame careful deliberation as a dangerous luxury. By the time you realize you have a choice, the deadline has already passed. If the system is constantly pushed to the absolute brink, using legal voids and ticking clocks, it should logically lead to a total, unrecoverable collapse. This collapse is avoided by a specific hierarchy, the transition specialist class. Backed by major tech conglomerates, their entire function is to manage and calibrate the ongoing chaos to ensure it remains profitable without becoming terminal. Using real-time surveillance, the systemic thermostat measures tension. The goal is to keep society bouncing violently above equilibrium, but safely below total collapse. They dial up tension to justify emergency powers, then surgically lower it to prevent a true systemic break. Traditional forms of governance relied on public equilibrium and stability to stay in power. Modern institutional structures derive their kinetic energy directly from the friction of this constant crisis. The thermostat exists to freeze the crisis indefinitely. It ensures that the sensation of being perpetually on the brink is a carefully guarded institutional asset, not an accident. There is a very specific economic and political motive driving this machine. Actually resolving a crisis would mean a return to equilibrium. That would force elite classes to surrender their lucrative emergency powers and the extreme market volatility they profit from. Because of that intense profit motive, what started as short-term measures for temporary emergencies have been quietly codified as the permanent baseline for modern governance. To reclaim agency, we have to recognize a hard truth. A population cannot simply vote or debate its way out of a machine explicitly designed to bypass legislative friction. The first necessary step is psychological recognition. When you hear intense countdown rhetoric and artificial deadlines in the media, you must identify them as manipulative mechanical triggers rather than genuine reality. Reclaiming the future requires the engineering of parallel immune systems. This means building localized economic, agricultural, and social networks that operate on a logic of homeostasis rather than manufactured instability. As this diagram illustrates, these parallel systems succeed by creating their own internal stability. By producing your own resources and maintaining local rules that don't fluctuate with the news cycle, you sever your reliance on the centralized machine and its weaponized uncertainty. By refusing to participate in the choreographed collapse and building localized stability, you stop being a helpless subject of the perpetual transition. You become the architect of a stable future.